in from Florida's Department of Environmental Protection. We have Mallory Dimmitt, CEO, Wildlife Florida Corridor Foundation. Blake Gable, CEO, Barron Collier Companies. Henley Shotwell, owner, Surf and Turf Custom LLC. And then we have Representatives Rommel, Botana, and Mello, and I want to thank them for their support on this. We have been very much of the belief since I became governor that Florida's success is tied to us being good stewards of our great natural resources here. And part of that is it's just the right thing to do. Part of that is that there's a huge economic impact, a positive economic impact that we get because we're a place that people want to come to fish and to boat and to enjoy our parks and all the other things that we have to offer. Outdoor recreation in the state of Florida generates over $52 billion in economic output. And our Florida state parks alone have an economic impact of $3.6 billion, and it supports more than 50,000 jobs total. So this is significant. We understand how important it is to the lifeblood of the state, and we're proud that we've taken a lot of action to do something about it. Now, you see some of the stuff behind me. What is this? This is part of Florida's Wildlife Corridor. In 2021, we signed legislation directing our state's DEP to encourage the type of investments and lead on the investments that were needed so that we could have a corridor that would protect and allow these native species to be able to move around naturally. We have almost 18 million acres of land in Florida's Wildlife Corridor, including 10 million acres of protected conservation land. And this includes state parks, it includes our forests, it includes privately managed conservation lands, family farms, and national park land. So this corridor is specifically designed to connect the state land so that wildlife can freely and safely move between them. And so since 2019, we've protected over 260,000 acres of conservation land, and more than 90% of that we've done in the state of Florida has been in Florida's Wildlife Corridor, and that represents about a $1.4 billion investment since 2019. So we're putting our money where our mouth is, but we're also able to do that in the context of a state that is working very well, particularly you look at some of these other states. So since 2019, yes, we have been able to invest in conservation. I did the announcement yesterday where we're talking about what we've done for Everglades restoration, the C-44 reservoir, C-43, all these things that are really, really important. But we've done that in the context of a state budget that is half the size of New York, which is our closest state population, and we have millions of more people than they do now. And yet our budget's half, yet we have better roads, services, education. We've had record tax relief since I've become governor. We've paid down 25% of our state's total debt. From the entire history of the state of Florida, we've knocked off 25% of that just in the last 5.5 years. We've also been able to run surpluses. We've been able to do infrastructure acceleration of projects through moving Florida forward, and there are projects in Southwest Florida that are going to benefit. Some of these things are in the queue. Some of them weren't scheduled to even start till next decade. We've got traffic now, so we're accelerating that by infusion of cash, and that's going to mean some of these projects are done 10, 15 years ahead of schedule. So that's going to make a big, big difference. So we're doing, and then by the way, we've had record support for education. So we're doing it right, and we're proud of that. I signed recently legislation that was spearheaded by our Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, your senator down here, SB 1638. And what that does is it takes the money that we get from the Seminole Gaming Compact. When I became governor, the state wasn't getting any money from Seminole Gaming, even though their Tampa casino is the most profitable casino in North America. Their Hollywood casino is one of the most profitable, and the state was getting nothing because the old compact had basically broken down. And so I was like, well, I want to get a piece of this pie, right? So we did a compact and negotiated that I think Florida is going to have a considerable amount of the revenue payments are going to come that, we don't need the money per se, but if this stuff is going on, then I think it's appropriate that we do a deal like this. So we did. And so what that gaming compact does is it creates a revenue stream. What the bill I signed does is ensure that some of the revenue is apportioned to things that are priorities. And so this will be automatic. So in future years, you're going to have about $100 million every year from the Seminole Gaming to support the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And that's going to be a great legacy from that compact. And we also have money earmarked for water quality and other things, but this is $100 million for the Wildlife Corridor, which I think we're really excited about. And we've done a lot, but there is more to do. We think about 45% of lands identified within the corridor have not been set aside for preservation yet, but with the investments we're getting, we're on our way to linking these areas so that we can promote safe and stabilized species movements. And so this Wildlife Corridor has plants, animals that like the Florida panther, the key deer, and others. But particularly what we're looking is to make sure that they can move around here. So we did have two major projects last year, $850 million, that we were able to do. One of those right here in Collier and nearby Hendry counties that connected the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge and Big Cypress National Preserve to the Dinner Island Wildlife Management Area and some of the other areas around there, which is really good. And then just in March, the Cabinet and I approved the acquisition of another 25,000 acres to increase connectivity within the corridor. And so part of what we do, and we work with the Department of Transportation to do that, is to create land bridges for the panthers to be able to go. So if you look, that is actually one of the land bridges. It's under a highway. You now have a situation. So first of all, if they have to go over the road, they can get hit by the cars. It's dangerous for the motorists and for the wildlife. So now they go underneath there. So it's able to connect on the other side of the road. And you're seeing this being done all across the Wildlife Corridor. So we have now, and this is evidence-based, when you have these crossings, it does reduce the number of vehicle collisions involving panthers and other endangered species. So we have 200 wildlife crossings or bridges statewide at this point. And right now, FDOT has either installed or is currently constructing 38 different additional wildlife crossings across the state, just like the one we have pictured here today. So that's a big deal. I think we're doing it right. I think we're being good conservators of this great piece of real estate that God has given us. So we're going to continue to do that, but we had big progress this legislative session on that. The other issue that we're here to address, and the legislation that I'm going to sign, follows off our efforts as soon as I took office. I took office in January of 2019, and that was on the heels of a really significant red tide event in 2018 that really impacted Southwest Florida in a really big way, hurt tourism, hurt restaurants, major economic losses that were associated with that. And what we wanted to do is say, look, first of all, red tide is naturally occurring. It's not like we can just turn an off switch, but what is being done that may exacerbate it? I mean, clearly Ian exacerbated some of the things that were there. That was beyond our control, of course. When the Army Corps of Engineers discharges nutrients, water from Lake Okeechobee into the Caloosahatchee, when that gets out into the Gulf and that mixes with the red tide, that could aggravate what you see. And so we've invested in things like innovative technologies in Lake Okeechobee, so we have a better way to clean some of that. Now, we don't control the discharges at the state. That's done by the federal government. We have not had the same level of discharges since I've been governor, partially because we worked with the Trump administration to say, guys, you've got to be mindful of the effects this can have on our coastal communities. Really significant impacts. And so they've managed the lake in ways where they were trying to, for most of these last 5.5 years, do that. Now, we'll see what they do in the future, They don't necessarily have the schedule in place as early as we thought to manage it going forward. Nevertheless, we want to be able to mitigate. If they're sending water in the bad season to do it, we want that water to be clean. So we've invested in that. The other thing we did was we reconstituted the FWC Red Tide Task Force, and we did programs to do research in conjunction with Moat Marine about ways to mitigate the impacts of red tide. And so there have been millions of dollars that have gone into that. There have been multiple phases of studies that have taken place over these last many years. When you do this, you got to figure out, does it mitigate the red tide? And if it does, okay. But then you got to look at what are the other impacts of that. You can't just be dumping things in against red tide if it's going to cause other problems. So there's a whole process that goes along to this. But we think that this is something that's a noble effort. And so HB 1565, this is going to continue our red tide mitigation and technology development initiative. It was set to expire this year. This removes the expiration date. We're going to continue to deploy innovative technologies to curb harmful algal blooms like red tide on our beaches and on our coastline. We want to do it safely. We want to make sure that whatever is being applied isn't going to have side effects. Sometimes the side effects may be worse. Of course, you don't want to do that, but it's really important that we are attentive to this. And so I'm proud that we were able to do that. We obviously had a rough 2018, which kind of, I think, gave us momentum to push forward with this going forward. We've also looked, if you look at kind of the things that have done, we're doubling the number of offshore sampling surveys that are being done for red tide compared to 5.5 years ago. FWC, our Fish and Wildlife Commission, they have 25 projects through the FWC Center for Red Tide Research in response to recommendations from our harmful algal bloom red tide task force, which we set up in 2019, focusing on measuring and forecasting red tide and the impacts that'll have. And then we've also instituted nearly year-round deployment of technology to devise to monitor for harmful algal blooms in the Gulf of Mexico. We had a couple years ago, you had blooms in Tampa Bay area, and one of the things that we now have the ability to do is we have funding where we can go and do emergency cleanups so that you get that off, because if you leave it out there, it metastasizes and it creates huge problems. So that quick cleanup mitigated some of the effects that were happening there. And then, of course, the technology of, we have stuff in Lake Okeechobee on some of the algae blooms that if you do it, it does treat the algae blooms pretty effectively. We want to get to the same point where we're able to do that with red tide. So I am not only going to sign this legislation, which is important, I can also announce that I have approved, I haven't gone through the entire budget, but I've already approved for this upcoming fiscal year $20 million towards innovative technology combating red tide and harmful algal blooms, and over $22 million for red tide research, management, and mitigation, which is really, really significant. So we will have now invested in both blue-green algae and red tide mitigation over $125 million since January of 2019. That's a big investment. So I'm going to sign the bill in a minute, but first we're going to hear from some of the folks that we have. So we'll start with our Secretary of DEP, Sean Hamilton.
Thank you, Governor. Again, my name is Sean Hamilton, and I have the pleasure of serving as Secretary of DEP for America's Conservation Governor. Yeah. So stretching from the Panhandle all the way down to south of the Everglades, these acquisitions that the Governor talked about, they're shaping not just what you enjoy today, but the future of Florida for generations to come. And so well, if you don't know it, I'm going to tell you, Florida is the national leader in land conservation. We've had great success over the years. We've had great programs. But I tell you now, the momentum that we're seeing under our conservation governor is unlike anything that I have ever seen. And hopefully, I think you can attest to that as well. So 23 years ago, we started the Florida Forever program. Again, one of the premier in the country. But I think I have to give points of reference because I candidly, maybe the governor's starting to spoil us. Our expectations that he keeps blowing out of the water, I think we start to lose sight of how far we've come over time and just since his tenure as governor. So since 2019, we've had $1.4 billion invested in the Florida Forever program. Again, I told the governor yesterday, Governor, I'm still trying to get use of incorporating billion in my vernacular. It's still, I always get, wait a minute, no, it's billion. And so it's that type of commitment, that type of leadership that is allowing us to make meaningful gains. We're having conversations with landholders, stakeholders we couldn't have before. Whenever I show up into a meeting and I say, I know, I'm hoping to get $5 million next year, they walk out the door. But if I tell them I've got the leadership of the governor, the commitment for our legislative body to make meaningful investments, not just this year, but tomorrow, those conversations happen in earnest. And again, from somebody who's working on this on the ground, I want you to understand the tactical advantage that provides us to make meaningful differences. So, again, point of reference, the governor mentioned the last cabinet about the 25,000 acres. I'll have you know that is one of the largest acquisitions in decades from the Florida cabinet. Again, point of reference. And so as you think about that, as you understand and expect that from our boss and from our legislative leaders, that is important. Those are stepwise, meaningful advancements for our state as a whole. We talk about the wildlife benefit, the ability for habitat to navigate. Think about the ecological values. That's where your drinking water comes from. That's also where your flood resiliency comes from. Again, there's something in the wildlife corridor for everybody. You just got to understand and appreciate it. But also the governor mentioned while working on these conservation goals and making sure those lands are protected in perpetuity, we're also rising to the complex challenges of our water quality. The governor mentioned it yesterday. We got over $500 million in water quality targeted investments that he's going to sign in the budget. That's important, right? He talked about the innovative tech that we're looking at ways to find ways to treat, to abate those issues as they come about, but also that stem the sources of the nutrients that either increase the frequency or the intensity at the same time. It is a multifaceted approach, but I'm glad to see our governor and our legislator rising to the occasion to do just that. And again, in closing, it's important to make steady gains on land conservation. It's critical, it's necessary, and it's the only way that we're going to realize the benefits for generations to come. And I just want to again thank the governor for his bold vision, continued leadership, and the support of our amazing legislature as Florida's environment remains a priority. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis, for inviting me today to represent the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation as we all celebrate the recent conservation wins for our state. And the governor and the legislature have proven their unwavering commitment to Florida's environment since the passing of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act in 2021 by approving protections and most recently 200,000 acres for permanent conservation, allocating significant funding annually for our state's conservation programs like Florida Forever and the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, and most recently with the designation of funding from the Gaming Compact to benefit Wild Florida. I want to add my praise to our state agencies that steward our natural resources and work with private landowners to administer these important voluntary conservation programs, including the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and the Florida Department of Transportation, whose underpasses you can see here, all of whom offer Floridians and visitors alike opportunities to get outside and explore and appreciate public lands within the Florida Wildlife Corridor. We are so grateful for how our state leaders have prioritized conservation and restoration, land management, and resiliency through their continued support. And this meaningful and consistent funding helps communities throughout the state and hundreds of partner organizations act for the wild Florida we all know and love. While there are still nearly 8 million acres that need to be protected within the Florida Wildlife Corridor, I'm thrilled that these programs and initiatives are accelerating the pace of positive change to connect and protect the corridor. And together with these collaborative efforts, we're able to showcase Florida as a model for the entire nation. I couldn't be more proud to be a Floridian for the enduring conservation legacy that we're safeguarding here for future generations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On Friday, the company that I've been privileged to work for the last 25 years, Barron Collier Company, will celebrate its 113th year as a landowner in the state of Florida. And over that 113 years, at the beginning, when Barron Collier acquired what was ultimately over 1 million acres, he did it for the natural beauty of the land. And since that time, the family, again, that I work for, has been instrumental in the creation of Big Cypress National Preserve, Fakahatchee Strand, Audubon, Picayune, Collier Seminole, just everything in Southwest Florida with an environmental protection on it. Somehow, some way, we probably had something to do with it. And that is something that happened decades before I came into existence, and certainly decades before I was in the position I am today. So when the wildlife corridor came into being and it really started to get traction under your leadership, Governor, Mallory, your organization and others, it was a natural for us to want to be involved. That is something that we've been doing for a very long time, and we're honored to be part of it. And I do just want to add one thing on water quality. I know we're here to talk about the corridor, but the water quality thing is important. And I doubt you remember this, Governor, but you probably hadn't been elected for more than a few days. And you came to FGCU Vester Center virtually day one to talk about the environment. And as chair for the past 6 years of FGCU, I saw the commitment that our legislative leaders, the governor had, and what they've been able to do with the water school at FGCU, the creation of that. I've had the opportunity to tour the C-43, and the incredible investment in and dedication to water quality is something that generations to come will benefit from. And I'm grateful to have played a small role in it. So thank you, Governor. Thank you.
Governor, thank you for your continued leadership and stewardship of the great state of Florida. You've taken charge of the economic challenges that we face as well as the environmental, which can be one and the same. There have been a great many challenges faced here of many different origins, some natural, many that are man-made. One of the challenges that we face is red tide, which is naturally occurring and being supercharged by man. I am hopeful that this bill will lead to a whole new host of tools to help combat red tide's severity in the future. After having vacationed in Southwest Florida my entire life, I moved here full-time in 2000. The purpose of that move was to be on or near the water and work in the fishing industry. I currently own a small fishing and hunting shop in Naples. When red tide events occur, it negatively affects the outdoor retail space, the fishing industry, but also heavily impacts tourism and service-related industries, as we've all seen in 2018. This bill is one more tool in the toolbox. You wouldn't expect a carpenter to build a house with just one tool. One cannot expect great change in water quality and economic strength while using just one tool. Thank you, Governor, for the tools like Everglades restoration funding, combating nutrient pollution, water policy, and bills like this that we need to help rebuild our house. Thank you.
All right, so anyone that's going to participate in the bill signing, you can come up and gather around, and we'll make it official.
Thank you.
Okay, on time? Okay. Yeah, happy to do it. Yep. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Hey, thanks. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm going to make two additional comments before I head on to our next stop. First is just in relation to what's been going on in the Congress recently. Republicans were sent there, and the number one issue that our voters wanted them to address is the southern border. and the massive influx of foreigners by the millions coming into this country, and we don't know who these people are, and they basically just surrendered on the border. They now have no leverage to do anything on the border. They had an opportunity to insist that Biden accept the border if he wanted all the forward aid, and they decided to capitulate. And so he got everything he wants, and Republican voters did not get anything with respect to stopping this problem at the southern border. And I just think look, we're doing more in Florida to deal with it than the Congress is. I mean, it's just pathetic that that's going on. So I was really, really disappointed to see that they basically capitulated entirely on the border. And at this point, you're not going to see anything done on the border for the rest of this year. What, are we just going to let in another 2 million people and do nothing about it? I think it was a real, real failure. The other thing is I hear that Joe Biden is on his way to Florida this afternoon, and all I can say is this is a guy who has intentionally opened the borders of this country and caused great harm. His policies have caused families to suffer with higher prices and higher interest rates, and now he's coming down to try to support a constitutional amendment that will mandate abortion up until the moment of birth, that will eliminate parental consent for minors, and that's written in a way that's intentionally designed to deceive voters. So all I can tell you is Floridians are not buying what Joe Biden is selling, and in November, we're going to play an instrumental role in sending him back to Delaware where he belongs. Thank you.